Welcome to CS Week Success Stories, second Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern webinar series. These webinars are the top-rated workshops from our attendees for Conference 38, held last May in San Antonio. I am John Sild, and I'm with CS Week. I'll be your moderator today. Amber Weems will be your host. CS Week and Conference 39 will be held April 27th through May 1st, 2015 in Charlotte Convention Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. We encourage you to register now. We're just a couple of weeks away. This program will be recorded and available for playback along with our other archive presentations. You can find it under the Educational Venues /webinars link on our website. Attendees are encouraged to upload questions in the Q&A panel on the lower right of your screen. Be sure to click the All tab to make sure that I will see your questions. We will wait until the end of the presentation to answer all the questions. Today's program, Best Practices in CIS Implementations, presented by Mandi, Lesher, and Chantal, Nault. Mandi is the Customer Service Manager at the Intermountain Rural Electric Association and has worked in the utility industry for the past 11 years. Her current position at the IREA includes responsibility for the areas of billing, customer service, remittance processing, and collections. Mandi has also served as project manager over several projects at the IREA and was the project director for the IREA's 2+ year enterprise-wide ERP implementation. She also helps lead the development of IREA's billing and payment strategy focused on the delivery of multi-channel payment options to the IREA customers. Chantal is the manager of system projects at Hydro Ottawa Limited and has worked with Hydro Ottawa since early 2005. During her 10 years with the company, she has been involved in numerous projects and was the technical lead for the successful implementation of a new customer information system at Hydro Ottawa in March of 2014. She is currently the project manager for the CC&B Enhancement Project, as well as 3 other initiatives. At this time, we welcome our ladies that are going to make our presentation, and we'll start with Mandi.
Good afternoon to all the attendees. Ironically, 3 years ago to this date, we were going live with our CIS implementation, and actually it was a full-blown ERP implementation. So I really enjoy having a chance to be able to explain our story. To give you a little bit of background, we were well behind in technology. We had a lot that we had to rip out and replace, and we had a very lean crew to do it. So if we can do it, everybody can do it. Was our project perfect? Absolutely not. Did it have issues? Absolutely. But we were able to make the critical pieces go well and do right when we needed them to. And so with that, I'll jump right in. I believe the slides, hold on one second. There we go. I was on the wrong slide there. All right. Okay, overall, the agenda, I'm going to briefly explain in a bit more detail about IREA, but really the biggest thing for you all to know is that my focus will be on before you decide to implement a CIS. Chantal will go more onto the implementation side. Both are extremely important. If you don't do correct due diligence up front, it can negatively impact you just as bad as if you choose to implement something poorly. If you choose a vendor that goes out of business or has financial issues once you're into the project, you aren't going to be successful, no matter how well prepared for implementation you are. The opposite is also true. You can pick the best vendor, and if you don't implement correctly, you still will not be successful. So it's very important to define your business need, know your costs and your options, and understand what is a best fit for you. As far as a vendor selection, I'm not going to promote any one vendor. You'll hear me talk about several, and they are just examples. It really depends on the utility on what is going to be important for you. Also, I'm going to unfortunately give you some bad news. There are some statistics that prove these can fail quite often, and you want to avoid that. I have a little bit of background in this and can give you guys ideas on how you can avoid those pitfalls and things to look for if you start to go down that path. I'm also briefly going to cover some key project management practices. This does hit a bit on the implementation side, so again, I'm not going to go too detailed since Chantal will get to that on her presentation, but I do want to cover a couple main points. Real quickly about IREA, we are located in Colorado, and as you can see on the map, we cover the southeast and southwest area of the Denver metro. There's several stars on the map, and that indicates our headquarters and 3 district offices. Our service territory is over 5,000 square miles, and we actually are closer to about 150,000 customers now, with just barely over 200 employees. If you do the math, again, we run really lean and mean. When you add a project onto this, understanding that we did not backfill our operational duties gives you an even bigger idea on how much we did take on. And again, if we can do it, you can do it. Digging right in, defining your business need. IREA was fortunate in that we were able to acquire the services of TMG Consulting that helped us put together an assessment to understand what our deficiencies were. I don't know how many of the attendees are on off-the-shelf CIS or still have a legacy piece of software. Regardless, if you're in this webinar, you likely are having issues. Something is deficient. You know it's deficient. The nice thing about acquiring a third party is they have details on what to look for to define on both the business side and the technical side what's deficient and what a different CIS could possibly do for you. Important, whether you have a third party or not, to have a good business case, because as this slide shows, it won't be cheap, and you shouldn't go into it with any understanding that it will be cheap. But if your business process and your case is solid enough, you can likely get the board or your general manager or whatever the case may be to agree it's important and push other projects to the side and have your capital funds go to this. In general, this slide is a guideline. It is not going to fit every scenario. It's just to give you an idea on how much you're going to spend. The replace column means replacing a legacy CIS with an off-the-shelf package. You can see this is obviously the most expensive option. However, please pay close attention to the opportunity cost. I'm going to focus on this throughout because it's very important. If you move 2 over to the migrate means you're going from one off-the-shelf package to another. Let's say you implemented SAP and then you go to Oracle. Both are very expensive and something you want to avoid. Do due diligence up front so that you don't have to do that. Going from one to another, even though you may have already taken your big leap in technology, is still a very costly thing to do. So you want to avoid going live with a software package and then saying, you know what, it doesn't really fit our needs, we need something else. Enhance, whether you're on a legacy CIS or an off-the-shelf package, enhancing is just doing minor tweaks in order to get you where you need to be. Obviously retaining, which in this case it's retaining a legacy CIS, is your cheapest option, but your opportunity cost is extensive. My personal opinion is it's not a question of if we need to move off a legacy platform, it's when. If your IT department is anything like ours, they are extremely busy with operational duties alone. They do not have the time or the capacity to be software programmers to develop a complete package, offer consistent bug fixes, offer annual upgrades. Whereas if you go with an off-the-shelf package, that's what that gives you. What you want to avoid is waiting until you're forced to move to a off-the-shelf package quickly, because if your only motive is a date, you can already be setting yourself up for failure. So it's ideal to do it when you know you need one, but when you're not forced. Then you need to determine your best fit. This is before you even get to a vendor. Best of breed and bundled solutions are the 2 biggest options. Best of breed is exactly that. You pick the best CIS, the best HR payroll package, the best asset management package. Functionally, that is the way to go. You're going to have the best functionality. The downside to that is the interfaces. And I don't necessarily just mean the GUI on what the user sees on the screen. I mean the background integration. Typically, in this case, you're going to have a lot of vendors to deal with, and you're going to have a lot of additional interfaces to get them all to integrate together. Once you're live, that could have some challenges. If your CIS vendor sends in an upgrade, additional testing to make sure everything works. Sometimes upgrades come at different times, or sometimes in production you have an issue and vendors point fingers. On the bundled side, that's typically a solution that's usually one vendor and has a suite of products. Oftentimes, there's more inherent integration. Yes, in some cases, a vendor can go buy different products and the integration isn't really rooted from the beginning, but they've put some work into the integration. So typically, you'll have fewer interfaces. You'll still have some external vendors, maybe your bill print vendor, your collections, your banks, but they will be minimal. Usually, you also have one vendor in this case, so you have one throat to choke or one hand to shake, however you want to look at it. But the bottom line is you need to determine what the best fit is for you. For IREA, our best fit was the bundled side. We had a lot of issues with integration and multiple vendors in the past, and we went that route. We also did a huge project. We did the whole suite at once: CIS, asset management, financials, and HR payroll as a big bang. It was this weekend. 3 years ago. It was over 2.5 years in the making and took over 50 people, contractors included, to make it work. And yes, we started our cutover on Friday the 13th. At this point, we just decided to go big or go home. And fortunately, that date still worked with us, and we actually consider 13 a lucky number at this point. However, to get there was very detailed. What I want everyone to get out of this is the commitment in the beginning. In order for us to pick a vendor that worked for everybody, we got a selection committee at IREA that consisted of 15 participants, cross-departmental, also likely managers. The majority were. They're people that could make decisions. They're the people that you didn't want to take away from the business, but you needed to, because they're going to help move the project forward. The first thing we did with the help of TMG was to come up with our requirements. We went through several meetings and hours of work. They did come with templates for us, but obviously we tailored it to our needs. We ended up with over 1,200 system requirements, and that was on the CIS side alone, and 9 minimum vendor requirements. Some vendor requirements included some financial stability. It also included, for one, we required they already be implemented in utilities with X number of meters so that they could prove scalability. We didn't want to be the biggest client. If we got responses back and they didn't meet the minimum vendor requirements, we didn't even look at them. Once we got responses back, that's when the RFP process started. And the first thing that we did was take those requirements using a weighted scale and their responses. Their response had to tell us on each requirement, was it out of the box or more custom code? There was about 4 different options. And then that was all put into a matrix that overall showed us a big picture who likely supports our functional needs the best. After that was determined, we looked at implementation timelines, people that would be on our implementation crew, obviously cost, had a lot of considerations and picked the top 3. Once we got to the top 3, we flew across country, we drove 2 states away to do several site visits. We called a lot of references. And then we also set up week-long demonstrations that was very scripted, and they all followed the same, with the last day being focused on implementation alone. Another benefit in this case for us having a third party was they were able to look at the vendor and say, what you're showing them is great, but I don't think the client understands that's not part of your bid. You need to tell them how much it will increase with those bells and whistles. Or they could say, I understand both of your lingo and you're not saying the same thing. IREA really means this. So now understanding that, can you tell us, is that still out of the box or is that more custom code? It was really helpful to understand as best we could in the beginning before we picked our vendor. We picked Kayenta about 9 months after this process started, and the contract took another 3. So for us, the due diligence and the selection took a full year. Doesn't mean it's going to take a full year for you. It could even be longer. But the important thing is to make sure you do adequate due diligence up front. And now for the bad news. Everybody knows there's implementation challenges, and these things don't always go well. Statistics vary, but I typically find that between 62 and 75% fail in some regard, and you obviously want to avoid that. So what's the first thing you should do? Right before your project starts, define what constitutes success for you, because that is going to drive all your decisions. Take two separate utilities. Utility A may be in a state where they have a new regulatory requirement, their billing system doesn't work, they need an off-the-shelf CIS, and they need it by a certain date, because if they're not live, there's huge financial fines. To them, success may be getting live by that date. Again, not the best approach, because that can set you up for failure, but that may be their approach. So it may be they go live with a few more problems than they would like, they know what they are and they have workarounds, but they're live by a date. If they miss that date, it's not a success because they have financial implications. Or you could have utility B, they don't necessarily have a date, they have certain requirements though. You have to have X% of bills going out accurately. You have to have no critical issues and only X% of minimal issues. That was more IREA's situation. For us, it was more quality. We actually had a period of time where we got together and said, because of X, Y, and Z, we need to extend the project by 3 months, but we will get live if we do that, and we will do it correctly. We can take you live when we originally thought, but it won't be working correctly. We obviously consider that success because we did have a successful go live. And you'll be surprised how many vendors may actually also consider that on time because the schedule that was shifted was agreed to, it wasn't forced. So you really need to determine what does consider success, because you need to use these project levers. Is the quality more important? Do I sacrifice testing? These are decisions you'll make on a daily basis. One of the biggest reasons for these falling apart is unrealistic schedules. Your vendor will give you a timeline in the beginning, and it will be wrong. I promise you it will be wrong. Once you have a kickoff, then you really need to sit down with the vendor and say, okay, you've considered your timeline. Now here's ours. Here's our third parties. We have our payment processing vendor. I know they have a freeze around Thanksgiving, so for 8 weeks we have to push this out. Our bill print vendor. You need to consider all those interfaces when you're doing this. You also need to consider your conversions, which we'll get into. Inappropriate staffing. Don't have people on there that can't make decisions. They have to have authority, and they need to be full-time, or it will not work. Changing requirements during development. This can't be avoided completely, but it should be as much as possible. The better you are with decision makers in the beginning, the less likely this will be. But the more you change requirements after something's already been configured, the more testing, the more training, and the more risk. Poor quality work. If you're date-driven alone, you may fall into this. We got to get live by X date, so we're not going to test as much. Or, okay, it's wrong, but we're going to put it through anyway. Or we're going to have to cut a lot of training because we just have to get live by this date. You can see how that's extremely problematic. Lack of leadership. If the top isn't on board, nobody else actually working on the project will be. Very important that they're involved. You'll find several times where you're trying to make a decision between one department to the next, and quite frankly, they're disagreeing. And you need someone who is an executive sponsor that says this is the route we're going, and from that point everybody can move forward. I'm going to get into change management here in a bit, but don't ignore the impact of change. It could increase your risk significantly. Some key project management practices. Analysis. A lot of you may be laughing at this, but you'd be surprised how many utilities, especially if you're on a legacy system, your employees actually operate in silos. And believe it or not, one department has absolutely no clue what happens to their work once it goes to another department, how it affects other departments, how their decisions affect other departments. If you can do business processes up front, it's going to serve you well. If you don't know you, your vendor can't know you. And IREA was a victim of this. We didn't do all our business processes up front and actually had to stop one of our modules in the implementation process for about 4 weeks to do the business processes because 2 departments had no idea how they impacted each other and kept making negative decisions for the other one. So I highly recommend taking the time and doing this up front. Interfaces, again, just because you pick a bundled solution like we did doesn't mean this goes away. Your integration on the background still needs to be considered. We still had 25. Western Union was one, our payment provider, our e-bill, your bill print vendor. You need to think about all of these and log them and track them. At the time we went live, we were still printing bills in-house. And because of our due diligence and tracking, we were able to catch a major mistake that almost screwed us up. We have an inserter that inserted all our bills into envelopes. During the course of our Kayenta implementation, we changed our bill print size from a very odd shape to a normal 8.5 by 11. Once we got to the rehearsal cutover, we realized the vendor hadn't been contacted. They weren't on our schedule to be here for cutover to change the inserter. Luckily, we were able to get that figured out 4 weeks before, and they were added to the project timeline. Our cutover plan had well over 1,000 tasks, and that was so important. Otherwise, after we would have done our regular bill cycle, then cut over and started the next billing cycle in Kayenta, we wouldn't have got bills out the door. So very important to list all your interfaces and actually track them separately if you can. Testing and training. I'm not going to go too detailed into this because, again, Chantal's going to cover this a bit in hers. The main thing on testing, all of you know it's important, and you know there's several types. But what I can't emphasize enough is regression testing. Every change you make, even if you think it doesn't impact anything else, regression test at least your most important business processes to confirm it didn't break anything. This is where a code freeze is important, a line in the sand that just says no more changes, because the changes that you make could really impact your go live. You may go live with some issues, but you know what? You know what they are, and you have time to have workarounds for them and then can fix them after go live. If you put a change in just before go live, you may have fixed whatever issue you put in to fix, but you probably didn't have time to regression test everything, and you could have input a critical issue after go live. So it's really important to consider a code freeze and when you're going to do that. Training. You can't do it too early and you can't do it too late. If you do it too early, they'll forget. If you do it too late, obviously they'll be rushed. And if you don't do training accurately, you can actually consider it a failed implementation. If most of your CSRs don't know how to move people in and people are calling to start service, that's not going to be considered a success. Keep in mind with the code freeze as well, any changes you make could mean that after training's already done, you have to go back to everybody and say, just kidding, this is how we do it now. The closer you are to go live, the more it confuses them, the more it actually decreases their morale, and the more that they could have problems after go live. No matter how much you train, it's not going to be second nature. We had our subject matter experts or our project team still away from their operational duties for weeks after go live because they were on the floor actively helping people. A couple more key project management practices: conversions. Overall, determine what you need to bring over, summary data or detailed data. You need to have these conversations. Also consider how many conversions you're going to have. We had approximately 10. What you'll find in testing is sometimes it's not a bug, it's a conversion issue. One quick example, in our legacy system, all we had was account numbers. Kayenta now has person numbers and account numbers. Okay, so what do? We can't convert person to person. Does our social security in our legacy system become the person number? Is it in both? Do we just randomly generate person numbers? What do? That's one conversion decision after numerous ones that will take place. What we would do is our conversion team would convert, they would have a meeting with everyone, say this is what was fixed, and then you need to go ahead and retest. However, every conversion, because of environments and taking them down and doing what they need to do, could take a week out of it. And then change management. Employees will go through a predictable process. Unfortunately, it's not always quick and it's not always linear. Your testers may experience this the most, even if they're your biggest proponents. What we found is they aren't used to testing. They don't realize that software just doesn't show up perfectly. They saw it working great in the demo. Now they're testers, and they realize how much is broken because it's not fixed yet, and they go backward. Okay, this isn't going to work. This is going to screw everything up. And all of a sudden they have negative issues with something that they were excited about. So keep that in mind. Educate as best you can and start the two-way conversations as soon as self-concern starts to set in. And then IREA's lessons learned. There are several. Again, because of the complexity of a big bang, there is so much with environment management I could discuss, et cetera. You'll have my contact information if things come up later, but overall, these are the big ones. The biggest ones is full-time project personnel. If you can have people backfill operational duties while these people are completely out of the operations and on the project, that is ideal. IREA couldn't do that to some extent, but if you can, it's even better. Know your project levers. That's another one I really want to touch on. Again, quality, time, money, and resources. You're going to make decisions throughout that you're going to pull one and give it up for another. And sometimes these decisions happen a lot, so you need to know your success criteria so you can make those decisions accurately. And then have a code freeze and stick to it. I can't tell you how important, in my opinion, that is. This is my contact information. I believe it will also be available to all attendees after. So if there's additional information after the webinar, feel free to contact me. And with that, I will turn it over to Chantal for the implementation section of the presentation.
Thank you, Mandi. I really appreciate your going over the selection of a CIS. I just want to let everybody know that Roy Chapman and Mandi Lesher were actually the ones who were voted the top-rated workshop from last year's CIS week. I was asked to step in and present with Mandi on behalf of Roy, as Roy passed away suddenly and tragically last year on the 1st of June 2014. I had the privilege of working with Roy on Hydro Ottawa's CIS implementation as his technical lead on the project. So I'll go through some of the items that we did on our project. So first thing I'll do is I'll introduce you to Hydro Ottawa. I'll explain who we are and where Ottawa is located. We'll talk about our customer care and billing upgrade journey. So we actually went live with a new customer information system. We ended up choosing the Oracle CC&B application. I'll talk about the team. I'll talk about solution analysis. Mandi touched on that as well. Solution testing, how do you know when you've done enough testing? Reports, that's always a large development activity, and how do you know if you've done enough reports or how many do you actually need to develop? And we'll talk about how to make it a seamless deployment. I'll tell you a little bit about our current status because it's been a year as of the 6th of March 2014 that we went live, or 2013 that we went live, and I'll also discuss with you our lessons learned. So Ottawa, as you can see on this particular map, is just above Buffalo, and we're in Canada, and Ottawa is Canada's capital city. We have a population just under 1 million people, and we do have 4 distinct seasons. So we go from plus 90 degrees Fahrenheit all the way to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see from that diagram that we have people skating on our canal that's usually for a good 2 to 3 months, usually December, January, and February in the winter. Who is Hydro Ottawa? Well, Hydro Ottawa is the 3rd largest municipal electricity distributor in Ontario, and the province of Ontario is approximately 1.6 times the size of the state of Texas. We have 320,000 customers that we deliver electricity to, and we have approximately 700 employees. We're a provincial leader in service reliability in terms of delivery of electricity. Our smart meters are fully deployed to all of our residential and small commercial customers. And we also bill those customers with the data from those smart meters, and we bill them on time of use rates. So those are rates where we have high rates during the mid portion of the day. Either at the beginning of the morning or in the evening, we have mid rates that we charge our customers, and in the evenings and on the weekends, we charge them a low rate. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our customer care and billing upgrade journey. So in October 2010, Roy Chapman was assigned as the project manager for our particular implementation, customer information system implementation. There were 2 team leads assigned, myself as a technical lead, as well as a functional lead. Her name is Carol Lamoureux. So that occurred approximately May 2011. Then we issued an RFP in October 27th, 2011. Before that, from May to October, Roy, myself, and Carol were, together with a larger team, were putting together those very important requirements that Mandi spoke about. And then on May 1st, 2012, IBM was selected to actually do our CIS implementation, so that's what we call the build, as well as host and operate our customer information system for us for a period of 8 years post-go live. We began our cutover activities on February 28, 2014, and we went live with CC&B on March 6, 2014. And as I mentioned, we've just passed our 1-year anniversary. So let's talk about the team. And Mandi has touched on a lot of these things, and they are very true. In order to have a successful implementation, you've got to have strong executive support. So we had our Chief Operating Officer and our Chief Information Officer co-sponsored our project. And we also had our Chief Executive Officer who chaired our steering committee. So we were deemed the #1 project for the period of 22 months that it took us to actually implement our customer information system. And that really made all the difference in the world. As Mandi has highlighted upon, it's very important that you have executive support so that when difficult decisions need to get made, that you have the support of your executives to make those decisions. We did have a full-time dedicated project manager and project team. So Mandi mentioned this about this. We were able to backfill people and have them work 100% on our project. We had a functional lead selected. As I mentioned, her name was Carol. And then we had representatives or a person from customer care, from billing, from collections, from finance, and from metering. And these were the folks, I'll tell you, that operations said that they could not live without. And we said, we're sorry, we have to take them for this very important project so that they can actually be empowered to make those decisions and understand how the decisions that they're making, how it impacts the other groups. They actually worked all very well together. We also had myself selected as a technical lead, and we had several technical analysts assigned to the project who had experiences with our interfaces, existing interfaces that had to be rebuilt with a new system. They had experience with security, and as well I had a report lead who was responsible for the development, overseeing all the development of all the reports. We also had a full-time change management and training lead who was selected, and she had a team of 3 people. And they actually prepared all the training materials, made sure that all the business processes were found first off for our existing system, and were then modified to reflect the new system. We also had a full-time contracted project management professional support person who was very important on the project. She helped to prepare all of our status reporting, report on where we were with our testing. She also made sure that she updated our schedules and stuff like that, and updated our issues and risk registers, and made sure that we had all of our change request registers updated as well. So very important to have that independent support. So let's talk about solution analysis. So solution analysis, and Mandi mentioned this as well, that's the analysis phase. So very important phase to do. We ended up holding 22 solution analysis workshops, and those particular workshops were held in a variety of areas. So you can see below in the slide I've listed the different areas. We had some in billing, rates, and finance. We had an area that was called MTM. That really is how we sent transactions to our retailer customers. So we have here in Ontario, we have a retailer market. So customers can actually get their electricity charged from retailers within our market. We had a session, a whole series of sessions on meter data, field orders, and asset management. We had workshops on customer care, credit, and collections. We had specifically a series of workshops related to our 35 interfaces that we ended up building, and our reports, and reviewing all of those. We spoke about security, admin, and system configuration. So these were some of the requirements that were specific to security. We also had a session just about data conversion, how we were going to convert our data and what was important. We ended up making the decision to actually convert 2 years worth of billing data, detailed level, and then the rest of it we said we were just going to provide at a summary level for the period before that. And then as well we had a session, a series of sessions on bill prints and the letters that were generated from our system. So we ended up holding 22 solution analysis workshops. The main key members were the members of our project team that I mentioned before. We did pull in, though, people from the business in our operations group to actually participate in those as well. We ended up reviewing 1,500 requirements. So as you see, very close to the number that Mandi mentioned of 1,200 for their systems. And the good news was is that 91% of our requirements could be met by the base off-the-shelf application just through configuration. What we also determined is that we needed 57 enhancements to CCMB, so these were code changes or plug-in points that we had to actually do. And out of the 48 interfaces that we reviewed, we identified that we only needed to retain 35 of them. So by going through the exercise of reviewing all of our interfaces, we realized that there were interfaces that we had developed in our old system that were no longer relevant anymore. So an example of that was we used to send the number of dials on a meter to our IVR system where a customer could call in and enter a meter read. With the advent of us going to smart meters, we no longer have customers anymore calling in with meter reads because our systems are able to read all of those meters automatically for us. So we determined that we weren't going to rebuild that particular interface. Well, after all that work and we did all of our development and configuration of the system, then we had to determine solution testing and how much testing is actually enough. So we went through several phases of testing where the first phase of testing that we went through, and it was led by our system integrator, which was IBM, was system functional testing. So system functional testing was a 5-month effort that was led by IBM. And we did just shy of 550 test cases, as you can see. And that was an activity that we said we weren't going to exit system functional testing. So Mandi mentioned, do you have a date that you're working towards, or are you working towards quality or certain requirements? For us, we said that we would not exit our system functional testing unless we had 0 critical defects. So at that point, we did indeed exit with 0 critical defects. We did know we had 10 major defects that would require some workarounds or further work on them. And then we entered into a phase of testing that was our system integration testing. So that's where we tested all of the 35 interfaces with our new customer care and billing system. And it was really a joint exercise between IBM and Hydro Ottawa. And that's what made that activity so successful, is that it wasn't a matter of pointing fingers about when things weren't working. We were able to work together to determine the best way to solve each of the defects that we found. Because sometimes it's easier to change CCMB, the CCMB application or the code that's being developed there. Sometimes you're able to actually have your bill print provider maybe do a change on their end. So we ended up running 372 test cases. And again, the exit criteria from that particular test phase was 0 critical defaults. So we ended up having, again, 0 critical defaults. We had 5 major defects, which we ended up fixing during our user acceptance testing. So our last phase of testing that we did, and it was done with the functional folks that we had assigned to the project from each of the different areas that I spoke to you about. So it was led by Hydro Ottawa, and that was a 7-month activity. So we ran just shy of 2,000 test cases. As you can see, the vast majority of our test cases passed, and we ended up exiting our user acceptance testing with 0 critical defects. The one thing with user acceptance testing that I'll just caution you about is that your functional folks who are actually doing the user acceptance testing, they will want to test until the system is absolutely perfect. If you spend your time testing to the system to that extent, then user acceptance testing will actually go on quite a bit longer. So you have to decide at what point you're actually going to have tested the majority of the functionality in the system, so, and that you still have some fringe test cases that you have the opportunity to run some of them, but the idea is that you'll always have a certain number of things that you won't have the opportunity to test, and you just have to go live with those and see how the system operates. So the next big thing was reports for us. As you know, there's always lots of reports out of customer information systems and systems in general. So the first thing that I had my technical team do is we had to inventory how many reports we actually had out of our existing PeopleSoft CIS system. We've been live with that system since 2004, and we ended up determining that we had 327 reports that had been built against that particular system. Once all those reports were inventoried, what we did is we went through them with our functional team that was assigned 100% to the project, and we determined that out of those 327 reports, only approximately 157 were actually in active use. Because as you know, when you build a report, there are times when the particular business need or business requirement that it was built for might have been germane 2 or 3 years ago, but it's not relevant anymore. So that was a good news story that we were able to get down to 157. But still, to develop 157 reports against a new system, that's a lot of development work. So what I had the team do was prioritize those 157 PeopleSoft CIS reports, and we categorized them into 5 priorities. Priority 1 was it was needed on day 1 of go live for in order to properly operate the business with the new system. Priority 2 were reports that were needed within 30 days of go live. Priority 3 reports were within 60 days of go live. Priority 4 and 5 reports were reports that were really not needed for every day or were maybe only executed once or twice a year. So what we decided to do is to target only priority 1 and priority 2 reports. And we ended up with 58 priority 1 reports and 38 priority 2 reports. A lot of the priority 1 reports were financial reports that were needed to do the month-end closeout process with our finance system, as well as a lot of the day-to-day reports that they needed to understand how the system was actually operating and billing. And what we ended up doing is that out of those 100 reports, we ended up using a 3-pronged approach to actually, for the development or meeting of those report requirements. 40% of them, we ended up buying a third-party tool called Intellect. It's called the Meter to Cash Dashboard. You can see I referenced it in that little chart on the side of the slide. So that was a third-party tool, and that, like I said, we were able to meet 40% of our reporting requirements with that particular tool and some minor modifications to that tool. Then we had 35% of our reports. We did a direct port, or we had IBM do a direct port from from SQR to Hyperion SQR, which is part of that Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition tool set. So we were able to kind of use our existing SQR reports and port them over, and then we had to, of course, retest them. But there was not so much development work there. And then 25% of our reports, we rewrote them or had IBM rewrite them for us in a tool set, part of OBIEE called BI Publisher. So, and at the end of the day, I think that that was the right approach that we took, because what we find is 1 year post is that those 96 reports, the vast majority of them are still in use right now as part of the business. We had heard stories before our actual implementation where they had done quite a bit of work on reports, and because they were based on the old mindset of the existing or legacy CIS, they were no longer quite relevant once they had been developed against the new system. So deployment, can it be done seamlessly? Well, the answer is yes, because we had a very successful implementation, and we actually were able to do it in such a way that it was virtually seamless to our customers. Of course, it wasn't seamless to our customer service representatives, and Mandi touched upon this within her presentation as one of the key success factors. We ended up developing all of our training, online training or computer-based training in CC&B using a product called Oracle User Productivity Kit Pro. What it allowed us to do is we ended up creating 14 modules with over 202 topics with voiceovers and 21 curriculums. And what it supports is it supports different learning styles from your actual customer service representatives. So some of them you can say to the tool, show me, and it will actually, with a mouse and screen captures, actually show them how to do the work. You can actually say, have somebody voice over as the mouse is moving around the screen. So we used this to train over 200 employees, and what it meant is that we didn't need to bring everybody out into a classroom for training. They were able to take the training at their own pace, and we were able to see how well they completed the actual training materials. So we did a mid and final training assessment, and we could tell that 80% had passed all their training modules. And for those of them who didn't pass or had some difficulties, we could actually do some additional coaching on that particular side. As well, what this allowed us to do is it allowed us to actually, in terms of a change management approach, to actually let people have access to the actual system or see what the new CCMB application would look like for them. So we ended up releasing modules in little bits 2 months prior to our actual go-live date. And so a lot of the fear around the new system, they could actually see that it was quite similar to the existing PeopleSoft CIS system that we were using, and they could feel quite comfortable with it by the time we actually went live. One of the things that we did as well is that Mandi touched upon is that we developed a 2,000-step cutover plan. And that particular plan, we had various groups within our organization actually bring together and put together all of those tasks. And then what we did is that part of that particular cutover plan was the actual doing the data conversion. And the actual data conversion we did, I think Mandi said they did 9, we did 7 mock data conversions, and we used that data in our particular test phases. So we used it definitely for system functional testing. We used it as well in our system integration testing, and of course we used it during our user acceptance testing. In addition to those mock data conversions, we did 2 complete dress rehearsals of the 2,000-step cutover plan. So we did that approximately a month and a half to 2 months apart. And what that allowed us to do is it allowed us to see if all the steps were in the right order, were there things that we had actually forgotten. And we actually, some of them we just simulated. Of course, in terms of the graceful shutdown of our PeopleSoft CIS system, we couldn't actually execute that because that was a system that was actually running. But we could mock going through all of those particular steps, and then we actually converted all of our data and brought up the new CCB application. What also those dress rehearsals allowed us to do was to cut a really good idea of the time that it would actually take to do our cutover. And it turned out that we took 6 days to do our cutover, which we knew exactly it was going to take that time from our dress rehearsal, and we ended up finishing actually 7 hours early. After that, we had a hypercare period of 5 weeks post-go-live where the people who were on the project, team members, they were actually embedded back into our operations group, both from a support perspective and a business perspective, to answer questions, to help people with their work as they transition to the new system. We had daily defect triage meetings so we could actually understand what the major issues were. Were they training issues or were they actual system issues? And it really was an opportunity for our meter-to-cash support team, they were the ones who are going to be maintaining the system going forward, to actually take over from the project team the actual running of that particular system. So the results. Well, the results are that we went live. It was virtually seamless for our customers. It really was a non-event for our customers, and in terms of the media here in here in Ottawa, most of our customers received a transition bill, either 22 to 66 days. And the other big thing that we did is that when we moved from our PeopleSoft CIS system to our new CCMB system, we moved from bi-monthly to monthly billing. And so we now do double the bills in half the time, and we actually have fewer head count right now in our billing and our customer service area. Our call volumes have gone back to pre-deployment levels, and that occurred fairly quickly, I would say within 3 months. And most of the calls that we had post-go live were not due to the new system, because it was virtually seamless for our customers except for the monthly billing. We kept our account numbers the same between the old system and the new system, so they really had no idea that we'd gone to a new system except for the fact that they were receiving a bill once a month instead of once every 2 months. And as I mentioned, March 6th was our 1-year anniversary, and we've now produced over 4 million bills. And now we're very happy because we have a CIS that will grow with our company and as we offer new services to our customers. So our lessons learned, a lot of them I echo some of the stuff that Mandi has said as well. you need to have a dedicated full-time team from the business, okay? You can't do operational work and project work. They really need to be dedicated 100% to the actual project, and they need to have the authority to make decisions. That's really key, so you can make decisions quickly and keep the project moving forward. I would say that you should avoid compound requirements because they're hard to trace and to test. For solution testing, we did some of our solution testing before all of our configuration of our rates and whatever was completed, and I would definitely say don't do that because it causes frustrations later on in our testing cycles during our user acceptance testing. I would focus definitely on high priority reports. Developing and testing reports can be otherwise very time consuming, and you're going to end up with reports that maybe aren't used in the new system. Detailed deployment planning and practice definitely contributes to a seamless transition. So practice, practice, practice. That's what makes it so seamless. And perhaps some day in the life scenario planning would have alleviated some of our post-go live early stage frustration with some of the amount of kind of to-dos that we receive from the system. So I want to thank you very much, everyone. This concludes my presentation, and now back to you, John.
All right. I'm telling you, what a great presentation. Both of you had in-depth knowledge, and it was very thought-provoking, so great presentation. Chantal, let's start off with you. I've got a question here that was sent in. How do you know when to freeze the code?
That's an excellent question. Mandi mentioned that it's important to actually have a code freeze and to stick with it, but how do you know when to freeze the code? We originally had anticipated a 2 to 3 week freeze period before our actual cutover. What we found is that we were still finding some defects right at the very end of our test phase, and so what we ended up doing is that we ended up having a 10-day code freeze before go live. It's important that it be both code and configuration, because as Mandi mentioned, it's very easy to introduce errors that you actually don't know about if you haven't had time to do proper regression testing. So, and with us, what we did is that we did find some other errors that needed to be fixed, and we ended up doing the cutover, and then what we did is that immediately we applied a few defect fixes afterwards. Most of them were mainly configuration changes.
Gotcha. Okay. Let me ask you again. Here's another question for you, Chantal. Was the 5-week hypercare period long enough?
Well, we found actually that it probably wasn't long enough. I'm thinking that about a 12-week period might have been a bit better because we found that 5 weeks was sufficient in terms of resolving most of the code and configuration issues. But for the implementation of our system, we found that the tuning of some of the we call them to-dos, but these are work lists that your billers or your customer service agents need to work, that if we'd had a bit more time with the hypercare period, we would have been able to tune those so that we could have suppressed some of them so that people wouldn't have been told, about the same issue with 3 different kind of work lists to do. So I think that my recommendation would be to make your hypercare period 12 weeks long.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, here's a question that I'm going to throw out to both of you. What was your approach to data cleansing prior to implementation?
I guess I'll take that one first. Basically, our approach was we did as much as we could. The irony of the situation is that it's hard to cleanse data when you really don't know what you're going to be configuring first. So once you start having, converting first, once you start having those conversations on what exactly you're going to convert, some of that data really doesn't need to be cleansed. So you got to be careful too, because you can have some wasted effort. But we did start that, I'd say, approximately 3 months before. There were certain things that we knew we had to clean up. We did as much as we could, and then a lot of it was done throughout as our conversions went forward. So.
Agreed. And Mandi, I don't know if you found this as well, but we really tried to clean the data in our existing system so that the data would be clean kind of the next time you did another conversion, right? So
oh, absolutely.
Fix it right at the source. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, very good. Mandi, here's one for you. If you're only moving forward with a CIS versus several modules, does the decision of bundling versus best of breed still apply?
Yes, it does. And really what I would do in that circumstance is figure out where you want to move from here on out. If you have some sort of a technical plan, that's a really good idea. You may be doing a CIS today, but you may need an HR payroll solution later on. So I would say to get a really good idea of what you currently have, if all the other modules are something that works well with you, it's still important to decide at that point you may just want to go best of breed because you're going to have to integrate with those anyway. If you know that, let's say, HR, payroll, and finance, you know, coming down the pike are going to need to go out as well, you may consider a bundled solution because if you pick one that works for CIS, maybe then you can just tack on the same vendors, HR, payroll, and financial module. So it really depends on your technical plan and where you see yourself going, but I'd say you still have to consider it for sure.
Okay. And a follow-up is, if you could do it over again, would you first, I guess, what is the one thing would you change?
I would actually have, as Chantal said, to have people who are just focused on the project. That's the one thing we couldn't do at IREA, and I would have preferred to set some budget aside to have people backfill. We had to make some critical decisions in the middle of the project where we needed a couple additional testers. And so I had to go get them from my pool of CSRs that really had the operational side deteriorate a bit for a few months. Our call times were horrible. We did what we could to communicate with customers saying, listen, please bear with us. We're doing what we can to enhance our system for you. However, it was a huge struggle. So that is the one thing I would do differently. We had full time for the most part, but they did have some operational issues still. They didn't really waver, but if we could have separated them completely and had some backfill, it's going to benefit you very well, and that's what I would do.
Gotcha. Okay. Chantal, in the lessons learned, you mentioned compound requirements. What exactly do you mean?
Well, when we put together our functional requirements for the system, we had some requirements that had multiple parts. And what we found when we were actually doing our solution analysis and then our actual testing is that sometimes there's part of a requirement that's actually met by your base system and can be done through configuration, whereas another part of it needs an enhancement. So we found that kind of difficult to do requirements traceability effectively when they were compound requirements. So I have an example for you. So an example of a requirement that is not compound is the system shall display audit information for me to read. Now, I must admit that's not entirely clear what you mean by audit information, but you could expand that during your solution analysis session. An example of a compound requirement is one where it's got several pieces. So here's one that I have here that we probably should have split out into 3 separate requirements. So the system shall accommodate real-time pricing rates. The system shall also include and be able to accommodate tiered and TOU pricing, as well as process and accommodate the ability of negative hourly pricing. So as you can see, that's actually quite a few different requirements all kind of meshed up into one requirement, which made it very difficult when we were doing our testing to say, okay, well, all of those 5 pieces are being met by the system.
Gotcha. All right. We're closing on the top of the hour, and I'm going to close out with one quick question to you, Mandi. And if you can make it kind of brief, what were the challenges when determining the 1,200 plus requirements for the RFP? I know that's a hard question to answer in a short period of time.
Well, the biggest thing was obviously determining what were the most important and then also displaying them accurately for the vendors. Keep in mind your acronyms versus theirs are going to be very different. Detail everything. Budget billing, don't assume the vendor knows what that means. Detail everything, because what we found is that their assumptions were a bit different than our explanations, and it would have been better to explain it more.
Okay. Looking at our time, we are at the top of the hour, and I want to be mindful of all of our attendees' time. And so at this time, we'll go ahead and close this session for today. I do want to remind all our attendees that conference is in a couple of weeks, and I encourage you to go out to csweek.org and sign up for Conference 39. We'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we look forward to seeing you and look forward to some great presentations like the one you just heard in a couple of weeks. Mandi and Chantal, thank you again for being with us. At this time, this concludes our webinar.